on. Let's talk more politics now. Joining me now is Albie Amankona. He's another political commentator. Good evening, good afternoon to you.
Good evening to you, David.
Well, what a shame you're not here, Albie. Always nice to see you. So just, we were talking earlier, in fact, back to Benedict Spence about the number one priority for the government. Interestingly, let me ask you that. What would you think the priority should be? So the government now wrestling with the cost of living, the energy price cap, immigration, the failing NHS. What do you think they should concentrate on first?
In my opinion, the government has absolutely got to be concentrating on the supply side shortages in the economy, and the main supply side sources are in energy, in labour, in goods and in housing. And then once the government can deliver those supply side reforms, then we can get back to growth. But it's very important that we cannot be talking about this growth spurt in the UK economy without sorting out the supply side issues first.
But the question I have is, why hasn't the government actually got some strategic plan for any of this? It seems to me that we've missed all our targets, whether it's about building new homes, getting places for people to live, in terms of the cost of living. I think the government was caught completely napping.
I think what has been quite difficult, David, is that actually until 2019, the Conservative majority was very small. So we had the Lib Dem Conservative coalition from 2010 to 2015. Following that, we had the very small majority that David Cameron had. It went back down to a minority government with Theresa May. And then finally, back in 2019, Boris Johnson was elected with an almost 80-seat majority. And in order to get big changes through, David, governments need big majorities. So now we finally have the chance to be delivering some of those reforms that the economy desperately needs before the next general election.
Well, you say that, but many of our TalkTV viewers are pretty angry that this contest seems to be going on forever. I can't believe we still have another 4 weeks of this. I mean, really, it feels like a bit of a shenanigans and no one really in charge. Now, I interviewed Penny Mordaunt, when was that, on Saturday or Sunday, and she made it clear that, and I said, where is the government? And she said, well, actually, the government is working full speed ahead. But then you've got Steve Barclay saying, actually, this can't wait for Parliament to be recalled. The NHS is in a period of crisis. So it can't be both.
No, it can't be both, David. But as we've spoken before, this leadership contest is actually the leadership contest shortened. So we do have 4 weeks until we find out who the next Prime Minister is. It might not be what you want to hear, and it isn't what I want to hear, but that is the timescale that we have been set at. And what we need to be focusing on at the moment is, what are the two prime ministerial candidates going to be doing about the cost of living crisis? You know, over £4,000 in energy bills come January, and we're not really hearing the right noises from either of them, many would argue.
No, it's really interesting, actually, and I was saying, you know, we started about 1,400. Today we found out in January it's going up to 4,260 or thereabouts, and of course there are threats it will go even higher than that. I mean, 400 quid, which was Rishi Sunak chucking at people, I mean, that's a drop in the ocean.
It is a drop in the ocean, but remember, the government has pledged £37 billion towards the cost of living crisis so far. And actually, I think what's really interesting are the hustings that are going to be going on in Darlington tonight. Obviously, it's a red wall seat. It's not a typical Shire Tory seat. So I'd be interested to hear what the Prime Ministerial candidates have to say to this particular group of Conservatives in the north of the country about the cost of living crisis.
So do you think it's going to be more nuanced?
I think it will have to be more nuanced, because this isn't a typical Tory group of people. Now, if you think about people in the Red Wall, they actually quite like high government spending. They're not too concerned about higher taxes to go towards things like public services, the NHS. They're probably the main beneficiaries of things like the handouts that Liz Truss wants to not continue with. So it'll be very interesting to see how the Prime Ministerial candidates maybe temper themselves in this particular hustings this evening.
So it's really interesting. Over the last few days, I've been saying that there really does seem to be a difference between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, that Liz Truss is saying we will cut taxes. That seemed to be incredibly popular to begin with. Interestingly, there was this poll from the Times that said actually the majority, 64%, actually said it's about inflation, getting that under control before having tax cuts. Now, that plays better to Rishi Sunak. Now, the question is how big that poll was and whether it's truly representative across the country, but I guess in the Red Wall that would be pretty much stick.
It does play better to Rishi Sunak. I guess the argument would be, what is the point in a tax cut if inflation is going to take away any tax cut that you would have got from the government because you're going to be spending more on the goods that you can't afford? So ultimately, tax cuts, they sound great. I love a good tax cut. tax cut, who doesn't? But unless inflation is brought back under control, the tax cuts simply aren't going to be felt by any of the people who are meant to be the beneficiaries.
Can I just ask you about the energy price cap? It seems to me that, again, we have an unregulated industry. We're meant to have some sort of regulation. It's not working very well, is it?
No, we are in a very difficult situation, David. I think it is hard. It would have been hard to expect the regulators and the government to foresee the situation that we are currently in. Coming out of a pandemic where we're in lockdown for almost 2 years, immediately afterwards, a war in Europe threatening, energy prices across the continent and indeed across the world. And as we see very often, government can be quite slow to react to these issues. But now that we're in the middle of a leadership contest and it is front of mind for everyone, it is time now for the leadership candidates to really grapple with this.
So what do you think they can do? So whenever that Prime Minister is elected, Liz Truss says, right, I'm going to have an emergency budget. Rishi Sunak, I don't think, has actually committed to that as far as I'm aware.
No, Rishi Sunak hasn't committed to an emergency budget, but he has committed, I believe today, to more help in the autumn once he actually understands what the scale of the price rises will be for sure. So at the moment we've got some forecasts.
Is that another U-turn though by Rishi Sunak? It seems to me that he's changing his mind quite a lot.
I've not heard Rishi Sunak say there would be no more help come the autumn when the prices were going to go up. I think he's actually been quite consistent in that he has always said that he would be the Chancellor and now the Prime Minister to help people through this tricky period in time. I think what more people will be watching more out for a U-turn is from Liz Truss, who in the Financial Times over the weekend said there would be no more handouts. It'll be interesting to see whether or not she sticks to that line in Darlington this evening.
And of course those polls are pretty volatile, although Liz Truss does seem to be quite some way ahead at the moment. Now, in terms of the other big issue, which many TalkTV viewers are absolutely livid about, is the scale of the illegal immigration into this country. And no one has done anything about it. Priti Patel, to quote some of my colleagues, is pretty useless. Nothing has been happening. We've got all of these people coming in from Albania, 40% of those numbers coming from Albania, not a war-torn country. They can come here as a visitor visa, they can come here and work with a work visa, but they're not doing that. They're choosing to come on a dinghy. It feels to me as though now we've got 19,000 this year alone. Surely someone needs to come out very strongly from both of those camps. I don't hear anything that is strong enough from either of them.
Well, David, they have both committed to the Rwanda policy, but that was already a policy that was introduced by, Boris Johnson's government, and we need some new thinking. I think that's what you're asking for.
Yeah.
And in a particular article that we saw in the Telegraph today, we saw social media videos of criminals advertising of a summer sale for Channel crossings. That is totally unacceptable. And I think what we're not hearing from either of the two leadership candidates enough, or indeed this current government, is what they're doing to actually go after the gangs who are doing this people smuggling. We seem to be hearing a lot about what we're going to do with the illegal migrants once they get to this country, move them to Rwanda, if we can, if we don't have any legal challenges, but very little about what we're going to do about the actual criminals, the people smugglers who are making money off people's misery.
No, you make a good point. And actually, this is Operation Isotrope, which has identified, I think, 9 criminal gangs operating in France. Now, clearly, we've now got the intelligence that we know this is going on. They've called them Dragon, Lotus, Gorgon, Behemoth, Colossus and Titan, Tiamat, Hydra and Leviathan. But it's one thing to know where these gangs are, but it's another thing to stamp it out and to stop this happening.
Absolutely, and I think it feeds into a wider problem, I think, with our criminal justice system, which is that we aren't actually getting down to convicting enough criminals and putting them in jail enough. I mean, if you look at many of the crime statistics, whether or not they're in rape, whether or not they're in burglary, whether or not they are in channel crossing gangs, it seems that we can identify where the criminals are, but actually when it comes to convicting them, it's very difficult, and I wonder how we got to this state.
But even if you think the Rwanda plan is a good one, you can't actually send many people to Rwanda. If we've now got 18,000, 19,000 this year alone, where are they all going to go?
I think this is one of the problems with the Rwanda policy from the beginning. I think the plan at the moment was to send a couple of hundred over to Rwanda with the £120 million that we've actually given to Rwanda to take those couple of hundred people. Now, if we are dealing with almost 20,000 illegal migrants across the channel so far this year, and it's only, what, 2/3 through the year, then obviously that's not going to be enough, which is why actually what is required is more than just the Rwanda plan. It's more than just targeting the gangs. It's actually real wholesale reform of, I think, the Home Office. The Home Office as a department, in my lifetime, David, has never really functioned as well as it should be. And I think that should be the focus of some government reform.
It's very interesting indeed. And I think you're absolutely right. I think people are absolutely livid about what's going on. It seems that, you know, it's a bottomless pit. We spend more and more money on this. We're not solving the problem. And meanwhile, we're letting our own people starve.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's also important to note that when it comes to asylum seekers and so-called safe and legal routes in this country, even though we've done an excellent job having safe and legal routes from Hong Kong, from Syria, from Afghanistan, there is no general safe and legal route for people to apply for asylum. Actually, the only way that people can get here, there are 6 in 10 that maybe not, that aren't Albanian, can actually get to this country and apply for asylum legally. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about Home Office reform. It's got to be a nuanced approach to this. It's not just one silver bullet to fix the immigration crisis.
No, quite. And obviously the EU need to play ball as well under the Dublin Convention, which we're not necessarily in now. We've left the EU. But knowing the EU, I'm not sure the EU would like to play ball with the United Kingdom. Albie, thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you. That's Albie Amankona. After the break.